And like we told you last week, we're trying something a little bit different. So Pastor Jackson and I are just going to sit down. We're going to walk through one of the famous stories about David in that season of his life there in 1 Samuel. And then we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll issue a number 2 to this, and I think we might follow that up with another episode in David's life. Okay, so let me set this up for you guys. It's very, very familiar to you. 1 Samuel chapter 17. This is the story of David and Goliath, and we find David being asked by his father to take some food, basically some cheese, some provisions, to his brother and to his brother's commander, because the Israelites are squared off with the Philistines. Okay, so David goes out, he drops off the supplies, and then he makes his way to where his brothers are on the battlefield, because his dad has asked him to bring back a report of how his brothers are doing. Okay, and it's in the course of all of that David finds out, hey, there's a giant. He's challenged us. Everybody's scared, but here's what the king has said he'll do for the person who takes out this giant. So Pastor Jackson, you want to just hop in there?
Yeah, man, I picked this story because I love it so much. And being a chaplain on the football team, this is really easy to preach. So I've read it a whole lot, and I just think that for a lot of us, me included, that have been in church for a long time, even though it's a good story, this is something that we tend to gloss over a lot. I know David, he goes, he has a sling, he has a stone, woo, 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 boom, giant gun. But I think there's a lot of hopefully practical things that we can bring out of it that we can apply to our lives. The very first one that I always see when I first read the story is David. He gets sent by his father to the war zone or whatever. He's like, hey, bring this to your brothers, and then bring me a report back. Nothing glamorous. Nothing fancy. In fact, maybe a little inconvenient because you weren't even, I don't even know how the draft or whatever worked, but apparently he wasn't even asked to go to war.
Right.
And so he's like, okay, whatever. He goes, and it's in that place where he goes after being asked by his father that this opportunity comes up. You know what I'm saying? And I just...
Yeah, sometimes serving isn't sexy, right? It's just, you got to take the cheese. You've been asked to do it. There's nothing super special anybody could have taken these provisions.
Yeah.
I didn't take any skill or anything like that for him to do this particular task.
Yeah, and I think it's awesome at the same time because, man, it's in that moment of obedience that opportunity comes up for David's life. And I think that this can be applied to moms, to dads, to children, to grandparents, to elderly, to young, because I think that, I've been there, man, when's my next opportunity coming? God, I want an opportunity. God, I want you to use me or do something in me and through me. But I think about how many opportunities I probably missed because I didn't want to do the regular, the normal, the inconvenient, or the usual.
The boring, the not flashy, the just basic, anybody could do this type of work.
Yeah. So I'm just and then, it's just, I don't know. It's always convicting for me. So we don't have to belabor on that point. I'm just that's always convicting. What are we missing because we're looking for something better, bigger, greater, newer?
Absolutely. So he gets there and he finds out what's going on, and he has really stumbled upon this incredible opportunity. This story is one of the most famous stories, not just in the Bible, but one of the most famous stories of all time. Okay. Yeah. And so he stumbles into this amazing opportunity. And finally, Saul hears about David's questions and things he's asking the men. And so Saul calls for him. And David says, all right, I'll take this guy out. And Saul doesn't want to do it at first. He doesn't take David seriously at first. But David convinces him to let him do this because he's killed the lion, he's killed the bear, and he believes that God will be with him in this. But then Saul tries to put his armor on him, and David doesn't initially refuse. Like, he tries to wear it. It's awkward. It doesn't really work for him. And then he finds himself having to go back to what he knows, to who he has been, to this slingshot and a few stones.
Yeah, I think, one thing I try to do you think it was too, I ask these questions when I read it. You think it was too big? You think it was too small? You think it was just like what, right? I'm thinking, I don't know. Like, it says
well,
it didn't fit, right?
It just didn't fit. Yeah.
But I think David knew, he tried it, but he knew, man, this thing, having this on me or with me or whatever is actually going to hinder me more than help me. Absolutely. And a question I have that I'd like to hear, I guess, from you is, I think we do that a lot within our lives today, practically. Mm-hmm. We're not wearing armor, obviously, but we try to do a lot of things that we think would help us, and it would even make sense. Like, this is going to help me. But sometimes, it's not what God called us to. It's not what God has for us. What does that look like practically for us of trying to wear other people's armor or equipment or whatever?
Well, you hear a lot of people say things like, you got to do you got to be yourself. And I really am for that. I truly believe that God has made each one of us unique. Everybody's path toward what God has for them is a little bit different, and everybody's set a little bit differently. It's easy to look at ministry oriented things and make this application. If you are a TD Jakes style of preacher, you can't ask that person, hey, why don't you preach like Charles Stanley or John Piper? That's just not going to happen. They can try, they can try to do that, but they're just not going to have the same effectiveness in ministry as they would if they just do their style, right? Yeah. So it's more of a stylistic thing. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily so spiritual per se, but it's more just about understanding how God has made you and being okay with that. How God has made you in partnership with His Spirit is enough. It really is enough to do the things that God is calling you to do.
Yeah, I think, just as you're saying that, just something that popped into my head, and I'm just kind of I'm not a parent, okay, so I'm not but I want to just I guess I don't know, I feel for some parents that might be watching this, if you're full of the Spirit and you are obeying His word, teaching His commandments to your kids, do you as a parent, in a sense of don't try to be the Pinterest mom. Don't try to be the Instagram couple or dad or whatever, but be you, do you. I don't know who this is for. Like I said, I'm not even a parent, but I just feel that or in marriage, follow His commands, live by His Spirit. But like you said, it's not a spiritual thing, it's a stylistic thing. You don't have to be that couple next door. You don't have to be the family across the street. God has anointed you, just like He had done with David, for whatever moment that you're going to walk into, even if it's in the regular and the normal facet of life. And when you walk into those opportunities, that is not the time to change what you've always done, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I just like felt like that's an application we need to make. Like, oh, I'm in this opportunity. Now I need to change. No, that's the last moment in time that you need to change. You need to stay where you're at in your lane with what you know, like David did. So
Absolutely. And there came a time later where David had his own armor. Because you do grow into things, so it's not static. I mean, you do grow, you do change, but you gotta stay true to you, which is actually interesting because in the very next scene, when David goes out and he faces Goliath, David doesn't make it about him.
yeah,
When you read what he says, I mean, he's saying, "Hey, you've defied the armies of the living God." He's saying, "Hey, the same God that delivered, the lion and the bear to me, he's going to deliver you into my hands." Like, he makes the whole thing not about himself, even though he's being true to himself. He makes it about God, and I think that that's one thing that we can easily lose sight of, especially in our culture that's very flashy, that's very Instagrammy,
yeah,
that wants to look a certain way and have a certain vibe to it. Is that that's okay if that's your style and that's who you are, but make sure that it's always about God,
yeah.
that it's always for him, that he's like the focal point of what you're doing.
Yeah, it can like I see it. I mean, we see it in Christianity all the time. Like we'll mask us by putting God over it when really it's still about us. Like, like those hashtag humble brags. You know what I'm saying? I don't
Yeah.
know. It's like, hey man, like, man, it's like I'm taking a picture and I'm
The
reading,
Bible is bigger than mine, apparently.
but I love God. Look how big my Bible is, type thing.
Mhm.
Like hashtag humble brags, but like what David does a great job of is saying it over and over and over again. He's always reflecting, almost always like bouncing back to like, this is him. This is because of him. Past victories were because of him. I am
Absolutely.
going to have victory, but it's because of him as well. And him saying it out loud. Pastor spoke on this Sunday, like our mouth and what we say. If we're always saying like, yeah, I did this and this is what happened and this is how I did that, like that can really start to hurt us. But if we say, man, I was able to do this because God was with me or God got me or whatever, that's what David did. And I think that's how David balanced that tension, because it's a hard tension to balance.
It is. And we're gonna wrap this up here, but we're gonna wrap it up with this thought. Obviously David kills Goliath, he chops off his head. And maybe you've never thought about it in this type of way, but in this sense, David is a type of Christ. We all, want to be David, but in this sense, David is a type of Christ because he kills the giant that everybody else is too afraid of. The giant is too much for the rest of us. But Christ comes along, anointed of God, the anointed one comes along,
Yes.
and he slays the giant. But then the part that I really love about it is that after David slays the giant, that's not the end of the story. Actually, it says that the people then rose up and they pursued the Philistines. I mean, they just slaughtered the Philistines and they came back with a whole lot of bounty. So there's this sense in which David won a victory. But then because David won a victory, everybody else also won a victory. It wasn't just a victory to be celebrated, it was a victory to participate in. And that's the same that Christ does for us. His victory is not just one for us to celebrate, it's one for us to participate in. We get to have personal victories because of Christ's victory. And that's the image here, that David is a type of Christ, and we're the people of God, and Christ is one, so now we can win.
It's good. That's great. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say about that. You just like hit it on the head. I love it. And I think that I'll say this. I think that because of his victory, the only thing is we are able to fight not in fear but in confidence because of the victory he's already had. So,
well, Pastor Jackson, would you pray us out?
Of course. Jesus, Lord, I thank you that you are our champion, that you are mightier and greater than David, and you have won the ultimate victory for us. And Lord, I pray that we would fight from that victory, and we would see victories in ourselves, victory in our homes, victory in our families, and in our marriages from the victory that you have given to us. God, let us not try to be other people, but let us follow you and be the person that you have called us to be. Lord, I love you. We love you. God, I pray over our church family that you would just allow them to remain encouraged and blessed in every way as they serve you, and let them keep you at the focal point of their heart. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, we love you guys, and we'll see. We'll try to teach on Bathsheba and
Part two.
David here soon. Part 2.